It's been a while, hasn't it? In this video, I'm going to rank every pyro hat that can be an unusual quality based on profitability and sellability, starting from the lowest average to the highest average price. I want to change up the criteria a bit since there are certain periods of the year where one hat can be really good or bad, and this video wouldn't age well, so it would be an inaccurate representation for your trading. So what I've come up with is a 5-star tier grading system in 5 different categories, which you can imagine like your school grades, where if you get enough stars or marks in, the different criterias, you'll overall get a profitability of an A or an F based on the amount of stars you get overall. They are aesthetics. How good does the hat look if it had no unusual effect in the first place? Popularity. How frequently does this hat sell regardless of any effect due to demand? Supply. How many of these exist in unusual quality, and how many are for sale, impacting its sellability? Inflation. To what degree is this hat prone to having high buy orders, dictated by bots overcutting each other, and the hat's rarity? Lower is better, and also, does this hat commonly have a big margin between buy orders and sell orders? And experience. I've traded with most of these hats before. How well did it sell for me, or at the very least, how well did it sell for somebody else? To get an S, a hat needs to get 22.5 to 25 stars. An A is 20 to 22, a B is 15 to 19.5, a C is 11 to 14.5, a D is 8 to 10.5, an E is 5 to 7.5, and an F is a score below 5. And as a last reminder, this tier list isn't fully definitive. You can't just expect to buy any S tier pyro hat and expect to make a large amount of profit. Any of these hats can make profit. I'm suggesting my view for how well it has sold for me and how commonly it is profitable for me. At the end of the day, the hat with the biggest profit margin will, with evidence that it can sell, will yield the most profit. And since this video is very long, timestamps are in the description. Now with that out of the way, let's begin. Starting with the Hot Spaniel, which is a mercenary grade pyro hat from Winter 2024 cosmetic case, aesthetic wise I'd give it 3 stars. It looks solid, but it's nothing spectacular and certainly not horrible. Popularity wise I'd give it 4 stars. I commonly see this hat having many recent past sales, likely because it was released not too long ago and it looks solid. Supply wise I'm giving it 2 stars. Naturally, being a relatively new blue grade unusual, supply is quite high across a variety of effects, resulting in lots of competition, but there are some effects which have a reasonable amount. Inflation wise, the Hot Spaniel gets 5 stars. I've checked a variety of effects and this hat is not inflated at all. All buy orders are significantly lower than their suggested prices, which is how things should be, likely due to the trade-off of the high supply issue. And with my experience, I'm giving it 4 stars. I've sold a few Hot Spaniels before for nice profit, and I've seen others do the same. The only problem is that there is a decent chance you can get undercut due to high supply and competition, but it's manageable in your control. So overall, the Hot Spaniel has received 8 out of 25 possible stars, and that gives it a respectable high B tier placement, despite technically being the cheapest pyro hat on average. Next is the Elf Ignition, which is a commander grade pyro hat from the Winter 2021 cosmetic case. Aesthetics wise, I'd have to give it 2 stars. Christmas themed TF2 hats in general often have poor aesthetics and low sellability, but I'll give the Elf Ignition some credit due to looking like a particularly wacky hat which is very valued in TF2 trading. Popularity wise, this hat is certainly not popular at all. Almost every effect has an outdated price because it simply doesn't sell. And every sale in the past often has large gaps between each sale, indicating that selling this hat on average takes a while. Therefore, I'm giving it 1 star. Supply wise, I'm giving it 2.5 stars. The Winter 2021 cosmetic case is hardly ever unboxed, which amplifies the rarity of a commander grade unusual hat of the Elf Ignition. However, low supply isn't always good as it can artificially inflate the price of the Elf Ignition just because it's rare, but not because people actually want to buy it. Despite this, low supply does have the advantage of low competition, which is valuable, so I think a score in the middle of 2.5 stars is fair. Inflation wise, low supply causes it to have a 2-star rating. A lot of effects definitely have too high of a buy order, and it's simply because of rarity. Some effects do have manageable buy orders, but overall it's not great, and this eats into sellability and profitability. And in my experience, I'm giving the Elf Ignition a 1 star. I've sold like 1 or 2 of these in the past before, and they took ages to sell without a profit worth talking about. So overall, the Elf Ignition got a score of 8.5 stars and barely scrapes into the D tier. Next is the Splitting Headache, which is a mercenary grade pyro hat from the Halloween 2023 Bone Chilling Bonanza case. Aesthetics wise, this is quite poor. It's just a saw splitting the pyro's head and doesn't pair well with many cosmetics. 1 star. Popularity wise, it gets a 2. Some effects do get decent sales, but overall the lack of sales across various effects prompt me to give it this low score. Supply wise, it gets half a star. The Bone Chilling Bonanza case is commonly opened during events to get a limited unusual Mean Captain, but the byproduct of that is a lot of unusual splitting headaches. So many effects have multiple long-term unsold sellers due to very high supply, and it's why it gets a very low ranking. Inflation wise, it gets 2 stars. Naturally, because it has high supply, it's not very inflated. But that doesn't take away that it's very hard to sell, and margins are often very tight due to the abundant amount of sellers. In my experience, I'm giving it 0 stars. I'm currently selling a Stellar Ascent one, which I've owned for quite a while, and I've just been constantly undercut on it because there are literally 10 other sellers on marketplace.tf and it's a pain to sell. Additionally, I rarely ever buy it because it's rare to find a decent deal of an unusual splitting headache. Overall, the splitting headache gets a score of 5.5 and barely gets into E tier. Next is the Plumber's Pipe, which is a pyro hat you can unbox from your standard crates and the Robo crate. Aesthetics wise, this gets 0 stars. I was considering even like half a star, but it literally is the Robo version of an already very low tier hat being the Prancer's Pride. Popularity wise, it gets 1.5 stars. Not one effect has a recently updated suggested price, but I looked in a bit deeper and some of the more popular effects such as Disco Beatdown had a few recent sales on Marketplace, which I suspect is because this hat is likely a budget pyro hat, but overall, good luck trying to flip these fast. Supply wise, I'll give it 2.5 stars. It's really only the 3rd gen effects that have insanely high supply, and there's not too many sellers across the various effects. Inflation wise, I'm giving it 2 stars. It's rarely ever inflated due to supply and unpopularity, but at the same time, the profit margin is often low with buy orders and sell orders being very close to each other, giving you no room to actually make profit. And in my experience, I'm giving it 1 star. I don't often buy it, and when I do, I might be able to flip 1 key profit over an unnecessary amount of time, which sure is nice to make a key profit passively, but I would have been better off buying something else. Overall, the Plumber's Pipe gets 7 stars and joins the E tier. Next is the Firestalker, which is a mercenary grade pyro hat from the summer 2023 collection case. Aesthetics wise, I'm giving it 2.5 stars. It looks slightly worse than the Hot Spaniel, but it is alright looking. Popularity wise, I'm giving it 4 stars. This hat actually sells quite frequently, especially amongst its case effects. Supply wise, supply is insanely high on case effects and somewhat abundant on others. It's very common that you have to compete with other people to sell an unusual Firestalker, and therefore I'm giving it 1 star in this department. Inflation wise, I'll give it 2 stars. It's usually not inflated, but due to the high supply and high competition, profit margins are usually lower than average. From my experience, I'll give the Firestalker 3 stars. I have some experiences where I get a smooth profitable sale, whilst other times I frequently get undercut. So if you carefully monitor your unusuals, hopefully you can lean towards more of the former. Overall, the Firestalker gets 12.5 stars and sits in the C tier. Next is the Impaler, which is a mercenary grade pyro hat from the winter 2023 cosmetic case. Aesthetics wise, I'm giving it 2 stars. It's nothing more than a German style helm, which some people like, but it is quite basic. Popularity wise, I'm giving it a huge 4.5 stars. Across a diverse range of effects, the Impaler consistently sells at a fixed price range. Supply wise, I'm giving it 3 stars. Supply is often quite high, but it offsets more competition because of its frequent sales. Inflation wise, I'm giving it 3 stars. is often not inflated, but at the same time margins are low due to high competition. And in my experience, I'll give it 2.5 stars. Usually for me, I find that I can flip unusual impact impalers quickly even if there are other sellers on the market. However, the profit margin is below average. Therefore, the impact impaler gets 15 stars and barely pulls into the B tier. Next is the A Head Full of Hot Air, which is a mercenary grade pyro hat from the Confidential Collection case. Aesthetics wise, I'm giving it 2 stars. It's not very cool looking until it gets paired with space themed unusual effects. Popularity wise, I'm giving it 2 stars. Especially on case effects, it sells decently fast, but that's about it. Supply wise, I have to give it 0 stars. Supply is extremely high on older effects and way too low on newer limited effects. This is because the Confidential Collection case nowadays is 6.5 keys but was mass unboxed while it was still a lot cheaper. This has resulted in a lot of competition on high supply effects. Inflation wise, again it gets a 0 because the Confidential Collection case is expensive. Naturally, the A Head Full of Hot Air becomes so expensive because of rarity, but not because of actual demand, and this causes it to have a really low profit margin. And in my experience, I'm giving it half a star. I've owned this hat several times and there are only a few instances where I managed to sell it for a tiny bit of profit, and it was very frequent that I got undercut and didn't get sales due to high competition. Therefore, the A Head Full of Hot Air gets 4.5 keys and is the first hat to go into the F tier. Next is the Partizan, which is a mercenary grade pyro hat from the Winter 2022 collection case. For looks, I'll give it 3 stars and it's basic, but nice. Popularity wise, it gets 2.5 stars. On some effects, it sells decently well, while other effects haven't got one sale in its nearly 3 years of existence. Supply wise, it's insanely high on case effects and slightly high on other effects. And looking at various effects, there are quite a lot of sellers you'd have to compete with. So I'm going to give it 1.5 stars, and I believe there could be some opportunities where you can choose a good market to buy in. Inflation wise, I'm giving it 1.5 stars as well. The Partizan is pretty commonly inflated amongst a lot of unusual effects, and the margin is below average due to this fact. From my experience, I'll give it 2.5 stars. For the times that I have bought unusual Partizan deals, they sold somewhat quickly with mediocre profit margins. Overall, the Partizan got 11 stars and barely joins the C tier. Next is the Melted Mop, which is a mercenary grade pyro hat from the Summer 2019 collection case. Aesthetics wise, it's a fun and wacky hat but doesn't pair well with other cosmetics, so I'll give it 2.5 stars. Popularity wise, I'll give it 1.5 stars as it sells slower than average and has hardly any recently accepted price suggestions. Supply wise, it's pretty damn high. A lot of the common effects have multiple sellers, whilst newer limited effects are usually okay. I'll give it 1.5 stars again. Inflation wise, this hat is commonly inflated. A variety of effects have buyers higher than the suggested price, which causes profit margins to be low and risky. Therefore, I'm giving it a 1 star. And from my experience, I'll give it 2 stars. I've had a few sell for okay profit fast, but other times I've been stuck with it for a while with mediocre margins. Therefore, the Melted Mop gets 8.5 stars and goes into the D tier. Next is the Pyro's Boron Beanie, which can be unboxed from regular crates and the Robo crate. Aesthetics wise, it's the Robo version of the Pyro's Beanie, which is a nice hat, but the Robo aspect makes it look bad. I'll give it 1 star. Popularity wise, this hat rarely ever sells across all effects, and I'm giving it 1 star. Supply wise, it's very high on 3rd gens and a bit high on every other effect. However, quite a lot of effects have multiple sellers, so I'll give it 1 star here. Inflation wise, it's usually not too inflated, but the profit margin is often very slim due to the high supply and unpopularity, so I'll give it 1 star. And from my experience, I usually don't flip these, as the last time I owned one it took a very long time to sell for mediocre profit. So from my experience, I'll give it 1 star. Therefore, the Pyro's Boron Beanie gets 5 stars and sits in the E tier. Next is the Smoking Skid Lid, which is a pyro hat you can unbox from regular crates. Aesthetics wise, it's similar to the Impact Impaler, so I'll give it 2 stars here. Popularity wise, I'll give it 1.5 stars. It's often niche to find past sales of this hat, especially ones that are recent. Supply wise, third gens are high whilst other effects are low. However, many effects have multiple long-term unsold sellers, so I'm giving it a 1. Inflation and margin wise, I'm giving it half a star. This hat is actually commonly inflated due to bots overcutting each other, and the margin is low when high buy orders meet with crowded markets. And from my experience, I have no experience because I've never successfully bought a smoking skid lid before since it's never been profitable for me. Therefore, I'm just gonna have to give it 0 here. Overall, the smoking skid lid gets a 5 and goes into the E tier. Next is the Firefighter, which is a pyro unusual from the summer 2020 collection case. Aesthetics wise, I like it. It has the Street Fighter attachment to it, so I'll give it 3.5 stars. Popularity wise, it has frequent sales on case effects and infrequent sales on non-case effects, so I'll just give it 2 stars. Supply wise, it's very high across many effects, leading to high competition, but it has opportunities for limited effects, so I'll give it 2 stars. Inflation wise, this hat is universally pretty inflated, leading to lower margins in addition to high competition. I'll give it a 1 here. And experience wise, the Firefighter has been okay for me, netting me decent profit, but it does take a while to sell. I'll give it 2 stars here. So overall, the Firefighter gets 10.5 stars, and because I currently own 4 limited effects which haven't sold in ages, I'm putting it in the D tier. Next is the Real Fly hat, which is a pyro hat from the summer 2021 collection case. Aesthetics wise, it's nice and I know a lot of people like it, so I'll give it 4 stars. Popularity wise, it consistently sells at its suggested price, and I'll give it 4.5 stars in this case. Supply wise, it's pretty high, which has led to majority of effects having multiple sellers, so I'll give it 1.5 here. Inflation wise, the hat is a little bit inflated universally, but the profit margins are still solid, so I'll give it a 3 here. And from my own experience, I can safely say I enjoy selling unusual real fly hats as they often perform well with nice margins. I'll give it 4 stars here. Overall, the real fly hat gets 17 stars and goes into the B tier. Next is the Toy Tailor, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. I think that most people would agree that it doesn't look very good, especially compared to other pyro hats, and I'll give it 1.5 for aesthetics. Popularity wise, the Toy Tailor is horrible. It rarely ever sells at a reasonable price, and I'll give it 0.5 here. Supply wise, the Toy Tailor is universally not too high, but there are still several effects with long-term unsold multiple sellers. I'll give it a 2. Inflation wise, the Toy Tailor is universally slightly inflated, but the profit margins are often really low. I'll give it a 0.5. And from my experience, I strongly dislike selling the Toy Tailor because it is a pain to sell and it yields hardly any profit. I'm giving it a 0. Overall, the Toy Tailor gets 4.5 stars and qualifies for F tier. Next is the Brim of Fire, which is a pyro hat from the summer 2021 collection case. Aesthetics wise, it's a solid looking pyro hat, so I'll give it 3.5 stars. Popularity wise, the Brim of Fire sells well depending on what effect it is, but for lack of consistency, it's a 3 star at best. Supply wise, the Brim of Fire has very high supply, which causes it to have high competition when selling, therefore I'll give it a 1.5. Inflation wise, the Brim of Fire is universally slightly inflated and margins are mediocre, so I'll give it 2 stars here. From my own experience, I've had decent experiences with the Brim of Fire where I net nice profit quickly, but other times it can be slow, so I'll give it 2.5 stars. Overall, the Brim of Fire gets 12.5 stars and sits in C tier. Next is the Skullbrero, which is a commander grade pyro hat from the Halloween 2019 Spooky Spoils case. Aesthetics wise, it certainly is a good looking hat and I'll give it 3.5 stars. Popularity wise, this hat rarely sells, even on case effects, so I'll give it 1.5 stars. Supply wise, it's quite low as it's purple grade, which is nice as competition is limited, so I'll give it 4 stars. Inflation wise, The hat is pretty inflated due to low supply, but margins are decent, so I'll give it 3 stars. From my own experience, I've sold like one of these before which went decently well, but at the same time, I'm currently stuck with a 5th dimension one which I can't even remember when I bought it, so I'll give it 2 stars for the experience. Overall, the Skullbrero gets 14 stars and sits in the top of C tier. Next is the Respectless Robo-Glove, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. It's a generally agreed upon ugly pyro hat, as it's a robo version of an already low tier Respectless Robo-Glove, and I'll give it 0.5 for aesthetics. Popularity wise, it hardly ever sells across the variety of effects I looked at, and it only gets 1 star. Supply wise, 3rd gens are extremely high and other effects are a bit high. This leads to high competition and I'll give it 1 star for supply. Inflation wise, it's usually not inflated, but the margins are often slim due to high competition, leading to mass undercutting, so I'll give it 1.5 stars here. From my experience, I do not like selling the Respectless Robo-Glove, and I've only ever netted a tiny bit of profit over a long period of time, so I'll give it half a star here. Overall, the Respectless Robo-Glove gets 4.5 stars, which makes it join the F tier. Next is the Employee of the Mmmph, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. It's a decent looking pyro hat that people wear, so I'll give it 3 stars for looks. Popularity wise, some effects sell decently, but overall I believe it gets a 2.5 star rating. Supply wise, it's a bit higher where many hats have multiple sellers, I'll give it 1.5 stars here. Inflation wise, it's commonly a little bit inflated with below average margins, I'll give it 1.5 stars here. From my experience, I had great experiences way back in the past, but nowadays it's not something I'd usually touch. I'll go 1.5 stars. Overall, the Employee of the Mmmph gets 10 stars and goes into D tier. Next is the Combustible Kabuto, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. Aesthetics wise, it gets 2.5 stars, nothing special. Popularity wise, it doesn't sell very often across all effects, giving it a 1.5 star rating. Supply wise, it's above average, yet many effects have lots of sellers. I'll give it 1 star here. Inflation wise, it's slightly inflated, but the profit margins are commonly very low, so I'll give it 0.5 stars here. From my experience, I do not like selling this hat, and it's hard for me to find a good deal due to low margins, so I'll give it 0.5 stars. Therefore, the Combustible Kabuto gets 6 stars and goes into the E tier. Next is the Round-A-Bout, which is an assassin grade pyro hat from the Winter 2020 cosmetic case. It has a cool concept, but it's very bulky on the head and doesn't pair well with other cosmetics, so I'll go 1.5 stars here for looks. Popularity wise, this hat is horrendous to sell. Lacking past sales for a majority of its effects, I'm giving it 0.5 stars here. Supply wise, it's very low because it's a pink grade unusual, which usually limits competition, but I believe this gives it a disadvantage in the inflation section, so I'll give it a 2 here. Inflation wise, this hat is a straight up 0. It's only expensive because it's rare, and it's extremely hard to flip for profit for this reason. Experience wise, I own a special Snowfall one of these, which I've had for 16 months with 0 offers, so I'm giving this a 0 in my experience. Therefore, the Round-A-Bout gets 4 stars and goes into F tier for profitability and sellability. Next is the Burning Beanie, which is a Commander grade pyro hat from the Winter 2017 cosmetic case. Now this is a nicely themed yet basic concept for the pyro, which I'll give 4 stars. Popularity wise, it gets 2 stars and it doesn't sell very often on most effects. Supply wise, it's below average, yet due to unpopularity, it has high competition on more effects than I would have thought, so I'll give it 2 stars. Inflation wise, this hat is pretty inflated with low margins across a lot of the effects, so it's not easy to profit. I'll give it 0.5 stars here. From my experience, it often takes a while to sell an unusual Burning Beanie, and the profit is only okay. I'll give it 2 stars here. Overall, the Burning Beanie gets 10.5 stars and goes into D tier. especially because I own 4 of them right now which aren't performing well. Next is the Metal Slug, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates and the Robo crate. It's an ugly Robo version of the Triboniophorus Tyrannus, so I'm giving it 0.5 stars for looks. Popularity wise, it doesn't sell well on most effects, so I'll just give it a 2. Supply wise, it has high supply and often has multiple long term unsold sellers on a variety of effects, leading me to give it a 0. Inflation wise, it's not too inflated, but the margins are so slim as a result of high competition and undercutting, giving it a 1-star rating. From my experience, I don't ever touch the Metal Slug because it's a bad hat to resell most of the time. I'll give it 0.5 stars. Overall, the Metal Slug gets 4 stars and goes into F tier. Next is the Respectless Robo-Glove, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. It's a low tier, mediocre pyro hat, but some people do like it, so I'll give it 2.5 stars for looks. Popularity wise, only a few effects I saw sold decently, and the rest were highly infrequent. I'll give it 2 stars here. Supply wise, it's very high, which leads to high competition. I'm giving it 0 stars here. Inflation wise, it's not very inflated, but the high competition destroys profit margins, leading me to give it a 1. From my experience, the hat sells slowly for low profit margins, so I'll give it 1 star here. Overall, the Respectless Robo-Glove gets 6.5 stars and goes into E tier. Next is the Stately Steel Toe, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. It's an ugly pyro hat, despite not even being a robo hat, so I'm giving it 0.5 stars for looks. Popularity wise, I'd give it 1.5 stars as many effects struggle to sell. Supply wise, it's very high with high competition except on rare effects, so I'm giving it 0.5 stars here. Inflation wise, this hat is universally quite inflated with small margins. I'm giving it 0 stars here. From my experience, the Stately Steel Toe is a bad hat to resell and has hardly ever made me profit. I'll give it 0 stars. Overall, the Stately Steel Toe gets 2.5 stars and goes into the bottom of F tier. Next is the Dead Cone, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. It's a simple yet decent looking pyro hat, so I'll give it 3 stars for looks. Popularity wise, it gets a 2.5 as selective effects will perform well whilst others don't. Supply wise, it's pretty high and competition is slightly high, I'll give it 2 stars here. Inflation wise, the Dead Cone has definitely inflated a lot over the years, which lowers profit margins. I'll give it 1.5 stars here. From my own experience, I don't often buy Dead Cones, and when I do, they're hard to sell for mediocre profit. I'll give 1 star. Overall, the Dead Cone gets 10 stars and goes into D tier. Next is the Madame Dixie, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. It's a good looking pyro hat that is actually a hat, so I'll give it 3.5 stars for looks. Popularity wise, it sells okay amongst many effects, and I'll give it 2.5 stars. Supply wise, it's pretty high, but competition isn't too bad. I'll give it 2.5 stars. Inflation wise, this hat is highly prone to inflation for what it is, and I'll give it 0 stars. From my own experience, I've lost profit before due to inflation, and also have gotten long-term good sales, so I'll give it 2 stars here. Overall, the Madame Dixie gets 10.5 stars, and I'll bump it up to C tier because I think the low tier effects would sell solidly. Next is the Electric Escorter, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates and the Robo crate. It's a Robo version of the Waxy Wayfinder, and it straight up looks garbage. 0 stars for looks. Popularity wise, this hat is hard to sell, indicated by the lack of past sales across all effects. I'll give it a 1. Supply wise, it's often very high on low tier effects and moderate on high tier effects. I'll give it 1.5 stars. Inflation wise, the hat is a little bit inflated on low supply hats, so I'll give it 1.5 stars here. From my experience, I strongly dislike selling the Electric Escorter, and it's probably lost me more profit than I've made, so I'll give it a 0. Overall, the Electric Escorter gets 4 stars and goes into the F tier. Next is the Prancer's Pride, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. It's a mediocre looking hat that doesn't pair well with other cosmetics. I'll go 1.5 stars. Popularity wise, it sells decently on some effects. I'll give it 2.5 stars. Supply wise, it's very high with common competition across many effects. I'll give it a 1. Inflation wise, it's not very inflated, but it commonly has low margins, so I'll give it a 2. From my experience, I've sold some of these fast but for a low amount of profit, so I'll give it a 2. Overall, the Prancer's Pride gets 9 stars and goes into D tier. Next is the Handyman's Handle, which is a pyro hat unboxable from regular crates. I'll give it 1.5 stars for looks, as it's similar to the Prancer's Pride. In terms of popularity, it sells okay on a decent amount of effects. I'll give it 2.5 stars. Supply wise, it's insanely high across a variety of effects with very high competition, so I have to give it 0 stars. Inflation wise, it's pretty inflated with slim margins, so I'll give it 0.5 stars here. From my experience, the Handyman's Handle is hard to sell for low profit, so I'll give it 0.5 stars. Overall, the Handyman's Handle gets 5 stars and goes into E tier. Next is the Fire Marshal, which is an assassin grade pyro hat from the summer 2024 cosmetic case. It's a solid looking pyro hat that I'll give 3 stars to. Popularity wise, it doesn't sell very often as 80% of its effects are still on price, so I'll give it 1.5 stars. Supply wise, it's very low due to being pink grade, and this minimizes competition. I'll give it 4.5 stars. Inflation wise, the hat is a little bit pricey for what it is due to rarity, but profit margins are still solid. I'll give it a 3. I don't have experience with this hat, but I can see myself netting a nice amount of profit from a potential deal if I was to be patient enough, so I'll give it 3 here. Overall, the Fire Marshal gets 15 stars and goes into the B tier. Next is the bolted Birdcage, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates and the Robo crate. It's a very bulky and not well liked hat. I'll give it 1 star for looks. Popularity wise, it rarely sells on most effects, so I'll give it 1.5 stars. Supply wise, it's high with quite a lot of competition, so I'll give it 1 star. Inflation wise, it's not very inflated but commonly has low margins. I'll give it 2 stars. From my experience, the bolted Birdcage gives small profits with above average selling times, so I'll give it 1 star. Overall, the bolted Birdcage gets 6.5 stars and goes into E tier. Next is the Waxy Wayfinder, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. It's a mediocre looking unusual that doesn't sit well on the head. I'll give it 2 stars. Popularity wise, it gets a 2 as most effects don't sell well. Supply wise, it's pretty high with lots of competition. I'll give it a 1 star. Inflation wise, it is quite prone to inflation and its margins aren't great. I'll give it 1 star. From my experience, Waxy Wayfinders take a while to sell, but good markets can get good profit. I'll give it 2 stars. Overall, the Waxy Wayfinder gets 8 stars and goes into D tier. Next is the old Guadalajara, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. It's a good looking pyro hat that I'd give 3.5 stars. In terms of popularity, I'd give it 1.5 stars, and it often doesn't sell well on many effects. Supply wise, it's very high, leading to high competition, so I'll give it 0.5 stars. Inflation wise, it's a little bit inflated with decent margins, so I'll go 2.5 stars. From my experience, the Guadalajara sells just below average with decent margins, so I'll go 2 stars. Overall, the Guadalajara gets 10 stars and goes into the D tier. Next is the Hive Minder, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. It's a decent looking hat that I'd give 3 stars. Popularity wise, I'd give it 1.5 stars as it doesn't sell often on most effects. Supply wise, it's quite high, leading to often crowded markets. I'd give it 1 star. Inflation wise, it's usually not too inflated but often has low margins, leading me to give it 2 stars here. From my experience, the Hive Minder nets low profit margins and sells averagely. I'll give it 2 stars. Overall, the Hive Minder gets 9.5 stars and goes into D tier. Next is the Flamehawk, which is an assassin grade pyro hat from the summer 2020 collection case. In terms of looks, I'll give it 3 stars. Popularity wise, it sells infrequently on most effects, so I'll give it 1.5 stars. Supply wise, it's very low due to being an assassin grade hat and leads to mostly empty markets, 4 stars. Inflation wise, it's naturally very expensive due to being rare, but it often has good profit margin potential, 3 stars. For my experience, the Flamehawk is very hard to sell due to being too expensive for what it is, and its profit margin is average. I'd give it 1 star. Overall, the Flamehawk gets 12.5 stars and goes into C tier. Next is the Birdcage, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. Honestly, it's identical to the bolted Birdcage, so I'll give it 1.5 stars for looks due to being non-robo. Popularity wise, I'd give it a 2 as a select few effects sell well, whilst everything else is mediocre. Supply wise, it's high for low tier effects and moderate for high tier effects. I'll give it 2.5 stars. Inflation wise, it's universally slightly inflated with decent margins. I'll say 2.5 stars here. From my experience, the Birdcage sells okay for decent profit, so I'll go 2.5 stars. Overall, the Birdcage gets 11 stars and goes into C tier. Next is the Hottie's Hoodie, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. It's a nice looking pyro hat, I'd give 3.5 stars. Popularity wise, it sells decently on some effects whilst others are mediocre. I'll give it 2 stars. Supply wise, I'd give it 1.5 stars as it's quite high with high competition. Inflation wise, the hat is quite inflated on many effects, but has good margins, leading me to give it a 2.5 star rating. For my experience, the Hottie's Hoodie sells slowly for a solid profit. I'd give it 2.5 stars. Overall, the Hottie's Hoodie gets a rating of 12 stars and goes into the C tier. Next is the Pampered Pyro, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. I'd say it's an average pyro hat in terms of looks and gets 2.5 stars. Popularity wise, I'd give it a 2 as most effects are quite hard to sell, but a few sell great. Supply wise, it's moderate with moderate competition. I'd give it 2.5 stars. Inflation wise, the hat isn't very inflated, but the profit margins are quite bad, leading me to give it 1 star. From my experience, the hat is often hard to sell, and I often get undercutted, leading me to give it 1 star. Overall, the Pampered Pyro gets 9 stars and goes into D tier. Next is the Soulmate, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. Aesthetics wise, it's poor, but it is wacky, so I'll give it 1.5 stars. Popularity wise, this hat rarely ever sells across all effects, so I'll give it 0.5 stars. Supply wise, it's moderately high without too much competition. I'd give it 3 stars. Inflation wise, this hat is really inflated with small profit margins, leading me to give it 0.5 stars. From my experience, I've had a few unusual Soulmates before, and they didn't sell at all after over a year, so I'll give it 0 stars. Overall, the Soulmate gets 5.5 stars and goes into E tier. Next is the Bone Dome, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. It's average looking, so I'm giving it 2.5 stars for aesthetics. Popularity wise, it sells decently overall and I'd give it 3 stars. Supply wise, it's very high with quite a lot of competition, so I'll give it 1 star. Inflation wise, it is prone to inflation with low to medium margins where I'd give it a 1 star. From my experience, I don't often buy the Bone Dome due to low margins and it sells slowly, so I'll give it 1 star. Overall, the Bone Dome gets 8.5 stars and goes into D tier. Next is the Neptune's Nightmare, which is a commander grade pyro hat unboxed from the Halloween 2015 Gargoyle case. It's actually a cool looking hat I'd give 3.5 stars to for looks. Popularity wise, this hat hardly ever sells on all effects. I'd give it half a star here. Supply wise, it's really low due to being a purple grade unusual from the already super expensive and rare Gargoyle case, so competition is only an issue due to slow sales. I'd give it 3 stars here. Inflation wise, this hat is criminally too expensive for anyone to buy, hence why its popularity is poor. Plus the margins are bad, I have to give it 0 stars. And from my own experience, I've been really struggling to sell a It's a Mystery to Everyone one for over a year when I thought it would be decent because it's a case hat and a case effect, so I have to give it 0 stars again. Overall, the Neptune's Nightmare gets 7 stars and goes into E tier. Next is the Cranial Carcharodon, which is a mercenary grade pyro hat unboxed from the Halloween 2016 Creepy Crawly case. It's a cool looking pyro shark hat. I'd give 3.5 stars. In terms of popularity, this hat sells frequently on case effects, but less so nowadays, and only decently on other effects, so I'll give it 3.5 stars overall for sales. Supply wise, it's very high, which leads to high competition, which I'm forced to give a 0.5. Inflation wise, it is a universally inflated hat due to it being from the Creepy Crawly case, which is now very expensive, which eats into profit margins. I'll give it a 1 here. From my own experience, the Cranial Carcharodon used to be easy to flip for easy small profit, but nowadays it's harder to get a sale due to it being more expensive. I'll give it 1.5 stars. Overall, the Cranial Carcharodon gets 10 stars and goes into the D tier. Next is the Connoisseur's Cap, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. It's a slightly above average looking hat, which I'd give 3 stars. Popularity wise, this hat hardly sells at all nowadays, which I will get to why in a minute. I'm giving it 0.5 stars here. Supply wise, it's very high, but competition isn't too bad. I'll give it 2 stars here. Inflation wise, this hat is really inflated across all effects, which I believe is the main reason for the poor amount of sales and the poor margins. 0 stars here. From my own experience, the Connoisseur's Cap sells really slowly, so I'll give it a 1. Overall, the Connoisseur's Cap gets 6.5 stars, going into E tier. Next is the Pyro's Beanie, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. For looks, I'd give it 3.5 stars for the Pyro Joe signature hat. Popularity wise, it doesn't sell well for most effects, so I'd give it a 2 here. Supply wise, it's decently high, but competition isn't that bad on most effects. I'll give it 3 stars. Inflation wise, this hat is prone to inflation, and the margins are below average. I'd give it a 1 here. From my own experience, unusual Pyro's beanies are difficult to profit off due to inflation and low margins. I'd give it 0.5 stars. Overall, the Pyro's Beanie gets 10 stars and goes into D tier. Next is the Bubble Pipe, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. For looks, I think it's above average and gets a 3. In terms of popularity, it gets a 3 for selling decently on most hats. Supply wise, it's very high and has lots of competition, leading to a 1.5 star rating. Inflation wise, this hat is very inflated across all effects, which lowers profit margins, leading to a 1 star rating. From my own experience, I've had decent profit margins in decent time frames with the Bubble Pipe, so I'll give it 2.5 stars here. Overall, the Bubble Pipe gets 11 stars and goes into C tier. Next is the Firewall Helmet, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates and the Robo crate. In terms of looks, I'd give it 3 stars because it's the Robo version of one of the best pyro hats. Popularity wise, I'd give it 3.5 stars as there's usually a solid amount of sales on most effects. Supply wise, I'd give it a 4. Aside from 3rd gen effects, there's really not much supply of unusual Firewall helmets, which helps limit competition when selling one of these. Inflation wise, I'd give this a 4. This hat is often not inflated, whilst profit margins are promising on a lot of effects. And from my own experience, I usually sell these quickly for a good margin, so I don't see why I shouldn't give it a 5. Overall, the unusual Firewall helmet gets 19.5 stars and will be bumped up into the A tier. Next is the Little Body, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. Aesthetics wise, I'd give it 4 stars. I think most people would agree it's one of the better pyro hats in the game. Popularity wise, I'd give it 3 stars as it sells decently on most effects. Supply wise, I'd give it 3 stars as 2nd and 3rd gens have high supply which can cause competition, but it's manageable if you choose a good unusual little body to buy. Inflation wise, I'd give it 4 stars. It's not really inflated on most effects and margins between buyers and sellers are quite good. And from my own experience, the Little Body is a good hat to sell, so I'll give it 4 stars. Overall, the unusual Little Body gets 18 stars and goes into B tier. Next is the Burning Question, which is a Commander grade pyro hat unboxed from the 2018 Blue Moon cosmetic case. Aesthetics wise, I'm giving it 5 stars. It looks really good and fits the pyro very well across a variety of cosmetics. Popularity wise, it's dropped down to a 3.5 star rating from its glory days, and I'll get to why in a second. Supply wise, it gets a 5. Across all of the unusual burning questions, it has the perfect amount of supply for sellability due to its commander grade status. Inflation wise, this hat has gotten really inflated on generic effects, and even more so on limited effects, which limits how often it sells, but there is a great opportunity for margins, so I'll give it a 3. And from my own experience, the burning question sells faster than I expect for great margins, so I'll give it 4.5 stars. Not 5 because that has only been the case on a couple of occasions. Overall, the burning question got 21 stars and swiftly goes into the A tier. Next is the Feathered Fiend, which is a commander grade pyro hat from the 2017 Unleash the Beast cosmetic case. Aesthetics wise, I'd give it a 3, just slightly above average. Popularity wise, I have to give it a 1. It rarely sells for the upcoming reasons across all effects. Supply wise, I'll give it a 3.5. Because it's commando grade, supply is often quite low, but there can still be lingered competition due to low sellability. Inflation wise, this hat gets a 1. This hat is often very inflated, which is why it's very difficult to sell, as no one wants to pay that much for an average pyro hat. Margins are also affected by this high inflation activity. And from my own experience, I've never owned an unusual Feather Fiend because I've never found even a decent deal of one, so I'll give it a pity score of a 1. Overall, the unusual Feathered Fiend gets a score of 8.5 and goes into D tier. Next is the Triboniophorus Tyrannus, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. Aesthetics wise, it gets a 3, just slightly above average due to its uniqueness. Popularity wise, it gets a 2.5. It sells very averagely, I would say, on most effects. Supply wise, it's very high across a variety of effects, leading to high competition. I'd give it a 1 due to this factor. Inflation wise, I'd give it a 2. This hat is often quite inflated across some effects, which impacts potential for profitable margins. And from my own experience, this hat for profitability is just okay, but I haven't been able to pick up any recently, so I give it a 2.5. Overall, the Triboniophorus Tyrannus gets 11 and goes into C tier. Next is the Nappa's Respite, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. Aesthetics wise, I'd give it 4.5 stars. It's a great hat. Popularity wise, I'd give it 4 stars as most effects have sold at least once or twice recently for a reasonable price. Supply wise, it is quite high across all effects, but there aren't too many sellers currently on the market, so I'll give it 2.5 stars here. Inflation wise, the hat feels a little bit expensive for what it is, but if it does sell, then it sells. I'll give it 3 for inflation. And from my experience, the Nappa's Respite has been a solid hat to resell, and I'll give it 3 stars. Overall, the Nappa's Respite gets 17 stars and goes into B tier. Next is the Flame Warrior, which is an assassin grade pyro hat unboxed in the Summer 2023 collection case. For looks, I believe that it's undeniably 5 stars. Popularity wise, more effects are unpriced than there are priced, so I'll give it 2 stars. Supply wise, it gets 4.5 stars due to its status as a pink grade unusual, which limits supply and therefore limits competition. Inflation wise, I'll give it 5 stars. The hat is actually very well balanced for what it is and gives excellent opportunities for profitable margins. And from my own experience, I've never actually owned one before, but they seem really good to sit on for a while to make great profit, so I'll give it 4 stars. Overall, the Flame Warrior gets 20.5 stars and goes into A tier. Next is the Brigade Helm, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. I strongly believe this is the classic pyro hat and gets 5 stars for looks. Popularity wise, I'd give it 5 stars. Almost every effect has great past sales, which makes the Brigade Helm very dynamic, which is what we want in trading. Supply wise, I'd give it 4 stars. Supply is slightly high, but competition gets balanced out by the sheer amount of sales. Inflation wise, I'd give it 4.5 stars, as you could argue it's gone up in price a lot over the years, but it still sells really well and has profitable margins across a variety of effects. And from my own experience, the Brigade Helm has historically made me great profit before, even if I had to wait a bit, so I'll give it 4.5 stars. Overall, the Brigade Helm gets 23 stars and goes into S tier. Next is the Seared Sorcerer, which is a pyro hat unboxed from the Halloween 2020 Wicked Windfall case. I believe that aesthetics wise, this hat is Pyro's best unusual hat, and I'll easily give it a 5. Popularity wise, I'd give it a 5. It's incredible how despite the supply and expensive price tag, this hat sells so well on most effects. Supply wise, I'd give it 4 stars. There is quite a bit of supply, leading to usually more competition, but does that even matter when the hat sells so frequently? Inflation wise, I'd give it 4.5 stars. The hat is expensive, but this is highly dictated by supply and demand, so it's not inflated. Plus, the margins across many effects are great. And from my own experience, I really like selling the Seared Sorcerer due to the potential for higher profit margins, but sometimes it can take too long to sell, so I'll give it 4 stars. Overall, the unusual Seared Sorcerer gets 22.5 stars and goes into S tier. Next is the Attendant, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. For aesthetics, it looks really good, and I'll give it 4 stars. Popularity wise, I'll also give it 4 stars as it sells quite commonly on a variety of effects. Supply wise, some low tier effects have high supply, but overall it's well balanced and competition isn't too high. I'll give it a 4.5 stars. Inflation wise, the Attendant is slightly inflated since a few years ago, but it's still popular with solid margins, so I'll give it 4 stars. And from my own experience, the Attendant is a strong pyro hat that I would resell for great profit from time to time, and I'll give it 4 stars. Overall, the Attendant gets 20.5 stars and goes into A tier. Next is the Vintage Merryweather, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. Aesthetics wise, it's a 4, as it's a classic hat that many people love. Popularity wise, it gets 3 stars as some effects perform decently. Supply wise, it gets 2 stars as supply is high across all generic effects, which causes high competition. Inflation wise, the Vintage Merryweather gets 2.5 stars as some effects are definitely inflated and hard to sell, but the margins are usually okay. My own experience, I don't trade the unusual Vintage Merryweather that often nowadays because it's quite inflated, so I'll give it 2 stars. Overall, the Vintage Merryweather gets 13.5 stars and goes into C tier. Next is the Burning Bandana, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. It's above average in looks, so I'll give it 3.5 stars. Popularity wise, it sells decently on some effects, so I'll give it 3 stars. Supply wise, only 3rd gens have high supply, but more effects than I expected have multiple sellers, so I'll give it 3 stars. Inflation wise, the Burning Bandana isn't too inflated and margins are solid, so I'll go 3.5 stars. From my own experience, the Burning Bandana is a decent hat to flip for profit, and I'll give it 3 stars. Overall, the Burning Bandana gets 16 stars and goes into B tier. Next is the Propaniac, which is an elite grade pyro hat unboxed from the Halloween 2022 Ghoulish Games case. It does actually look alright, and it actually has animated flames, so I'll go 3.5 stars. Popularity wise, this hat is pretty hard to sell considering all effects are either outdated or unpriced, more of which are unpriced. I'll go 1.5 stars. Supply wise, it's very low due to being an elite grade hat. I'd give it 3 stars for this reason as, yes, there is no competition, but too low of a supply can be a disadvantage for inflation. Inflation wise, this hat gets 0.5 stars. When an unusual hat is too rare without being exceptionally aesthetic and demanding, it goes into this grey area of being expensive, yet no one wants to actually buy it. And from my experience, I've never owned one before, but I can speculate it being a 1-star rating based off the other criteria. Overall, the Propaniac gets 9.5 stars and goes into D tier. Next is the Head Warmer, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. Aesthetics wise, this hat is really popular and easily gets 5 stars. Popularity wise, I'd give it 3.5 stars as it sells decently well for being expensive. Supply wise, it's slightly high, resulting in some competition on some hats, so I'll give it 3 stars. Inflation wise, this hat has gotten significantly expensive over the last few years, but margins are still solid, so I'll go 3 stars. From my own experience, the Head Warmer is a decent unusual to resell for profit, but you do have to be careful not to sit on it for too long, and I'll give it 3 stars. Overall, the Head Warmer gets 17.5 stars and goes into B tier. Next is the Wraith Wrap, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. Aesthetics wise, it gets 5 stars, no questions. Popularity wise, it gets 4 stars as it sells well on many effects. Supply wise, low tier effects have a little bit of a high supply, but overall the hat's competition is very manageable and gets 4 stars. Inflation wise, the hat could arguably be slightly inflated with great margins, so I'll go 4 stars. And from my own experience, the Wraith Wrap can be hit or miss in selling quickly, but it often delivers excellent profit and I'll give it 4 stars. Overall, the Wraith Wrap gets 21 stars and goes into A tier. Next is the Seer, which is an elite grade pyro hat unboxed from the Halloween 2024 Terrifying Trove case. It's not exceptional looking for an elite grade, but it still looks good with animated eyes, so I'll go 4 stars. Popularity wise, only 5 effects out of 18 have accepted price suggestions in its 10 months of existence, so I'll go 2 stars. Supply wise, it's so low due to being an elite grade that you're just not going to face any competition, and it gets a 5. Inflation wise, the price is boosted due to being super rare, but it definitely can sell with solid margins, so I'll go 3.5 stars. From my own experience, I have no experience, but I'd speculate 3 stars if I were to try and sell one. Overall, the Seer gets 17.5 stars and goes into B tier. Next is the Pyromancer's Hood, which is a limited pyro hat from the now expired Nice Winter Crate 2014, unboxable only from December 15, 2014 to February 3rd, 2015. For aesthetics, it gets 4.5 stars for being basic, yet nice with high demand from collectors. Popularity wise, it's very hard to gauge because this hat is so rare that it hardly ever sells, but it 100% attracts collectors who are open to paying a lot. So I'm just going to say 5 stars if the majority of supply is already in locked away collector backpacks. Supply wise, it gets a 5 for what I'm pretty sure is the lowest supply unusual pyro hat in TF2, leading to only one seller, Fish Crimes, who is selling 2 of them on the entire market. Inflation wise, you can't even say it's inflated if buyers aren't even trying at all due to the hat being so rare, so I'll just give it an automatic 5. And from my own experience, there's no way I'd ever own one, but it's the type of unusual hat that is expensive and that you'll sit on for a while until a collector comes by with a huge offer. I'd give it a 4. Overall, the Pyromancer's Hood gets 23.5 stars and goes into S tier, but probably every viewer will never own one. Next is the Cat's Pajamas, which is an assassin grade pyro hat unboxed from the Winter 2017 cosmetic case. I hate to say it, but this hat is certainly very aesthetic and has a huge fan base, and I'll give it 4.5 stars. Popularity wise, it's very hard to say a rating for an overall consensus, as sales highly depend on the collector and effect, but I'll say 3.5 stars. Supply wise, the Cat's Pajamas is naturally low due to being pink grade, yet it's near perfectly balanced in my opinion with demand, so I'll give it 5 stars. Inflation wise, the Cat's Pajamas isn't really inflated despite being expensive due to its supply and demand, but margins aren't always easy to come by, so I'll give it 4 stars. From my experience, I rarely sell Cat's Pajamas and they often take ages to sell, but for good profit, so I'll give it 3.5 stars. Overall, the Cat's Pajamas gets 20.5 stars and goes into the A tier. Next is the Flamboyant Flamenco, which is a pyro hat unboxed from regular crates. Aesthetics wise, it gets 5 stars as many people love it. Popularity wise, it's very popular as it sells often on many effects, so I'll give it 4 stars. Supply wise, it's a little bit high on most effects, which causes you to often compete with other sellers, so I'll give it 3.5 stars. Inflation wise, the hat is more expensive than ever, but it's popular and has a wide gap between buyers and sellers on most effects, so I'll give it 4 stars. From my experience, the Flamboyant Flamenco is a great hat to resell speed-wise and profitability-wise, so I'll give it a 4 and not 5 just because I don't find enough deals of it. Overall, the Flamboyant Flamenco gets 20.5 stars and goes into the A tier. Next is the Wandering Wraith, which is an assassin-grade pyro quick switch misc unboxed from the Halloween 2021 Crimson Cash case. Because it's a quick switch misc and looks great, I'll give it 5 stars for aesthetics. Popularity wise, it gets a 3 as it performs slightly worse than what I expect from a quick switch misc, but it's still solid. Supply wise, There's actually quite a lot of unusual Wandering Wraiths in existence due to the Halloween 2021 Crimson Cash case being so popular to unbox, so I'll give it 4 stars as more effects than I'd expect have multiple sellers. Inflation wise, this hat is certainly not inflated for what it is, with higher supply and high demand, so I'm giving it a 5. From my experience, the Wandering Wraith has potential to make solid profit if you're able to wait the time to sell it, so I'll give it 4 stars. Overall, the unusual Wandering Wraith gets 21 stars and goes into the A tier. Next is the Pyromancer's Mask, which is a Pyro Mist that is no longer unboxable from regular crates. Aesthetics wise, this instantly gets a 5. It's an excellent looking pyro cosmetic that is also a misc. Popularity wise, I'd give it 4. If this was back in the day, it would no doubt get a 5, but nowadays I believe that all unusual misc with low tier effects are significantly harder to sell. Supply wise, I'd give it 4 as well. Higher tier effects are well balanced, but low tier effects have too many in existence without enough selling, causing too much competition. But this can be easily avoided by choosing a good market to flip on. Inflation wise, this gets a 4. Yes, it has multiplied in price over the last few years, but because the Pyromancer's Mask is so good, it still actually sells for this expensive price with great margins, except for the lower tier effects. And from my experience, I'd give it a 5. There's been so many ways I've been able to profit off of unusual Pyromancer's Mask relatively quickly, and there's no reason to downgrade the rating for anything. Conclusively, the Pyromancer's Mask gets a rating of 22 and joins the S tier. Next is the Coffin Kit, which is a Pyro Mist that is no longer unboxable from regular crates. Now this is an unusual you'd likely never encounter, and neither will I, but let's rank it for fun. Aesthetics wise, it's a 5. It sits on your back and it's also a misc. Popularity wise, I'd give it a 4. It sells highly infrequently due to very low supply, but believe it or not, there are still collectors who would pay thousands to obtain an unusual coffin kit. Supply wise, it gets a 5. You're not facing any competition when selling an unusual coffin kit. Inflation wise, it gets a 5. The price of this hat just is based on supply and demand with huge potential for great margins. And from experience, only the very top traders and collectors will know. But maybe if you're already that wealthy, you're living a good life, so that's easily a 5-star rating. So the Coffin Kit gets an overall rating of 24 stars in theory, going into S tier, but it's highly unlikely you're gonna obtain one. And that's every unusual pyro hat in TF2 ranked from least to most profitable and sellable in 2025 according to my formulating opinions over the last 8 years. I've got the tier list set right here so you can have a good look at where I placed each hat. And while you're at it, make sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications and leave a comment. Additionally, check out my free Discord server in the top of the description, which is currently booming, and check out my school community as well, where my community and I will provide you with specific advice and actionable steps along your trading journey, forcing you to make heaps of profit. Thanks for watching, see ya!